Now, speaking as somebody who loves indie games, I'm no stranger to seeing lesser-known titles not get a lot of attention, but I'm actually shocked I haven't heard more people talk about Fuga at all. Made by CyberConnect 2 and released in 2021, Fuga Melodies of Steel is the first strategy RPG in the Little Tail Bronx series, a set of games that, along with Tail Concerto and Solitarobo, all take place in the same universe. Despite getting really good reviews from critics, the game did really poorly in the sales department. Like, it took until February of last year for the first game to sell 150,000 copies poorly. But outside of lacking or poor marketing, I couldn't really tell you why that is. Fuga Melodies of Steel gameplay-wise is pretty unique as far as strategy RPGs go, and for both that reason and plenty of others, it's honestly become one of my new favorite strategy RPGs in general. Frankly, it's just a really great game all around, and honestly, it's such a shame more people haven't played it at all. So join me while I explain in a lot more detail exactly why Fuga Melodies of Steel is one of my new favorite strategy RPGs. Fuga takes place in a world with two distinct races, the cat-like Felineko and the dog-like Kaininu, and currently the free lands of Gasco are fending off the invading Burman Empire. After the Burmans attack their village, the first 6 of our 12 protagonists, Malt, May, Hana, Kyle, Sok, and Boron, at the request of a mysterious woman on their radio, go to a forbidden cave near the village and find a massive tank called the Tyrannus. With it thankfully being able to drive itself, because there's no way a group of 4 to 12-year-olds would be able to drive it otherwise, the kids set off to free their family and the other villagers who've been taken prisoner by the Burmans. There's a lot more to the Tyrannus than it seems, though. It's shown early on that this thing is clearly much more than just a small fortress on wheels, with it having the ability to rewind time and, disturbingly enough, a weapon called the Soul Cannon that runs on living sacrifices. All the while, Burman General Hax keeps mentioning something about a lost god and referring to the Tyrannus as the Iron Devil, which is a pretty good sign there's a lot more to this invasion than it seems. Having said that, though, the overall story of Fuga isn't anything too complicated at all, but I'd never say that's a bad thing. It does a really great job at telling a fun and even emotional story that's certainly not lacking in darker themes. On the whole, though, I really enjoyed the journey these kids went on to save their parents, and our band of little heroes is a big part of why. Excluding 1 or 2 of them, they're not that complex writing-wise, but they were all very charming and even adorable for a few of them. And as a group, I think they work really well together, which does have me interested in how things progress for them in Fuga 2 and onwards. To those who are curious, though, my current favorites, aside from the ones who are just precious like May, Boron, as well as Hack and Chick, are Jin and Brits for having one of the more interesting character dynamics. See, Brits was a Burman child soldier that ultimately defected from the military for personal reasons I won't say here. Jin, however, sadly lost his father very shortly before the chapter you meet him in to the Burmans, and at the tender age of 11, he's not exactly a fan of them, and this extends to exactly who you think it does. It's not anything too crazy, but with how really everyone in the team is understandably a little put off by him for a while, it helps make Brits easily the most memorable character in the game for me. The thing that I liked the most, as well as what just impressed me the most about Fuga's story, though, is the lore, because let me tell ya, I was not prepared for just how cool and interesting it is. Like, I can't talk about a single lick of it without spoiling you on something, but needless to say, I love it. It's kinda hard to explain why without going into full detail, so to put it in the least spoilery way possible, Fuga's lore paints a picture of a world with a very deep history that I can tell a lot of thought was put into. It's the kind of lore that, for me, really shows just how much the devs love the world they've made for this series, and it got me really interested in playing its sequel as well as another game in this universe, Solitarobo, which I sadly can't play legally without spending an arm and a leg. Having said that, now's about time we get to Fuga's presentation, and aside from the occasional graphical glitch where the Tyrannus' lights would flicker, the game itself does look good. The models for all of the characters and the enemies look nice, and the backgrounds during gameplay are especially good looking. But my favorite aspect of the presentation is definitely with the game's art style. Fuga's artwork is just beautiful, and this level of quality extends to more than just the game's many illustrations. The character designs are all very well done, and well, obviously I'm biased since I love dogs and cats. Visually speaking, our main crew are all kind of adorable, with them all being equally expressive. I also really like the design of the Tyrannus. Despite being referred to as a tank, the Tyrannus really is better described as a small fortress on treads in universe, and its design really reflects that in my opinion, while also making it feel special in how unique it looks compared to every other tank in the game. I also really like how its treads look. The fact that they're separated into 4 separate tracks instead of 2, combined with the weird claw flap the front treads have, give it this feeling of being less a tank and more a metal beast, which is very fitting given that it's referred to as an iron devil. As you can imagine though, I of course also really like Fuga's soundtrack, with pretty much every song in the game being good in some respect, and a number of them being especially great. Some of my favorites are the game's main battle theme, Dance with the Bullets, for being a fittingly adventurous sounding song that never got old. Both versions of the game's main boss theme, Flower on the Trail, for sounding absolutely gorgeous, and Memories of the Sky and Earth, for very similar reasons. Even if you don't play the game for yourself, you should totally give at least these 3 songs a listen. I promise you won't regret it. Having settled that though, now's about time we get into Fuga's gameplay, and let me tell ya, it's fairly unique as far as strategy RPGs go. Combat-wise, the game's turn-based, with your active party being made up of 3 crew members who can have another kid serving as their support, which has a number of effects we'll get to when they're more relevant. Each kid specializes in using one of the Tyrannus' 3 different gun types, with those being machine guns, which have low power and high accuracy, grenade launchers, which are balanced in both stats, and cannons that hit like a truck but don't always have the greatest accuracy. Each of the 3 gun types will also be important for delaying an enemy's turn. See, in combat, who goes when is shown by this gauge at the top of the screen, and for enemies you can delay their turn by breaking the colored clocks below their health by hitting them with the gun of that color using either normal attacks or skills. This brings us to the crew themselves. Each kid has their own unique stats, and while some of them will share a lot of skills with others based largely on their gun specialty, they don't all learn them at the same level, and not every skill they learn is exactly the same. They also all have a special hero mode they can go into for 5 turns when their mood maxes out, which gives each kid some kind of unique bonus, like how Sheena gets to immediately act again after she uses a skill. All of this means that pretty much every kid is useful in some way at every point in the game, which is great, but that's not to say I don't have my favorites, of course. While pretty much every cannon user is great, the crew's leader Malt is my favorite purely because his hero mode doubles the damage for his normal attacks, which can absolutely melt a boss's health. Britz is probably the best machine gunner in the game for me due to his ability to potentially inflict shock, basically paralysis, on enemies, with him even getting an AoE skill that can inflict it on anything flying. As far as the grenade launchers go though, if I'm gonna be honest, pretty much all of them are just as good as one another, but I do want to give a special mention to Hana. Out of everyone in the crew who uses grenade launchers, Hana definitely has the lowest damage output, but she's by far the best healer in the game, and is easily one of my most used party member because of that, combined with Fuga's limited resources and just how hard enemies can hit. Yeah, in regards to that first bit, now's about time we get to the other half and arguably where the majority of the strategy in the game comes from. See, in Fuga, your items and general resources are limited to what you find in the field and during downtime. Outside of combat, you'll be moving towards whatever that chapter's objective is in the Tyrannus over a series of spaces that can have fights with varying waves and even difficulty, like with the purple elite spaces, spaces that give you materials for upgrading the Tyrannus, healing, etc. The interesting part, though, is that every chapter after the prologue will give you multiple different paths you can go down that range from safe, normal, and dangerous difficulty levels. Having said that, though, I want to go back to the other bit I mentioned a moment ago about how hard enemies hit, because let me tell you, the difficulty is kinda perfect for me. Up to normal, fights were hard enough that they kept me on my toes, but not so hard I was actively dying at all. It's a level of difficulty that always keeps you thinking and fights interesting without feeling frustrating at all. As far as the bosses go though, while I sadly can't talk about my favorites since they all involve heavy spoilers, I will say that pretty much every boss in Fuga is really great. They all feel unique, and just like everything else, they have a perfect level of challenge. And I really like that some of the earlier ones come back as mini-bosses later, cause it honestly gives a nice feeling of progression for how far the kids have come on the journey. On an important note though, more often than not, the bosses will generally be what tempts you the most to use the soul cannon. Yeah, that's not just a thing in the story. During boss fights, if you get below half health, the radio woman will chime in and you'll be able to use the soul cannon to instantly kill them. But it does come at some costs. For starters, outside of the time you're required to use it for the tutorial, if you fire the cannon at any point, you'll be locked out of the true ending. Secondly, need I remind you what, or in this case, who, the ammunition is? You want to fire this thing, then someone's gotta go, and you can't get them back. Now, having said all of that though, I do have a couple of criticisms for the Soul Cannon. For starters, you're honestly better off just not firing it. See, even putting the true ending aside for a moment, losing a member of the crew ultimately hurts you in the long run because unlike strategy RPGs like XCOM or Darkest Dungeon, your crew is a very limited resource you can't replenish, and one that's important for more than just their stats and skill pool. See, there are two mechanics tied to the affinity between two individual members of the crew, with passive skills called support effects and special skills called link attacks, of which every character has one. Affinity is increased when two people fight together and by having them talk with each other in the Tyrannus during intermissions. And once any pair reaches rank 2, they'll be able to use a link skill together and take advantage of the other's support skill, both of which get stronger the higher their affinity is. And while the support skill's usefulness does vary based on what it is and even who's using it, the link skills are always useful, because they hit pretty hard, and even going beyond that, they also have a wide array of useful effects, like Sheena, who restores 30% of the Tyrannus' SP, and Britz's link attack, that has an 80% chance of inflicting shock. Sure, it's just one link attack as well as passive skill and party member, you have 11 more, but that's not really the point. If my choice is between permanently burning something as valuable as a party member for one battle and fine-tuning my strategy so I can use them in every other future battle, it's no contest which one is the better option. As for the other issue with the Soul Cannon though, and keep in mind that honestly this is more of a personal thing than an actual criticism, I'm just not comfortable using it. Like willingly choosing to sacrifice the adorable puppy and kitty children, some of whom aren't even 10 years old, isn't something I'm even remotely okay with doing. If I'm up against a boss and I'm doing so badly I need to fire the cannon, I'll just restart the fight completely. Frankly, all of this makes Fuga's main gimmick pretty difficult to actually justify using for me, especially since in order to get the true ending, you're required to never fire this thing outside of the prologue. As far as everything else for the combat and resource management goes though, I don't really have any other complaints. On the whole, Fuga's combat and general gameplay is honestly just really well designed. It was challenging enough that pretty much every fight in the game was engaging, with its constant resource management making sure you're always making some kind of interesting as well as meaningful choice. Now, before we conclude though, let's touch on the intermissions real quick, because there are a couple of important things I've not gotten to yet. For starters, aside from upgrading the Tyrannus, you can also farm ingredients to make food that'll give you stat bonuses until the next intermission or the end of the chapter. In the event someone gets the depression, injured, or KO'd status effect from battle, you'll need to talk with them or let them sleep in the dorms for the latter in order to cure them, which just like everything else in the Tyrannus will cost you some of your 20 action points. I mentioned earlier how you can have two characters talk in the Tyrannus, depending on who you're controlling, to raise their affinity together. But at affinity levels 2, 5, and 10, you'll also get a link event for them, which are pretty similar to Fire Emblem's support conversations, with every kid having 3 link events with everyone else. From the ones I actually saw, while they aren't anything too crazy like you'd expect given what I said about the cast earlier, they were a really nice and fun touch. That being said, realistically, you're definitely not going to see all of these on your first run, and a second, possibly third playthrough will be required. On one final note though, we also have the ruins, which honestly won't take too much time to talk about. See, every now and then the crew will come across an old ruin and you'll be able to send 3 of the kids in to look for treasure and other materials for upgrading the Tyrannus, while fighting off monsters with a steam-powered gun that apparently uses toy bullets. Your main goal is to find and open the treasure chest itself, but to do that, you need to find the key hidden somewhere in the ruin. All the while, you have to ration the limited bullets you find to beat monsters with and break these walls and jars to get more materials for a better rank at the end. Frankly though, while the ruins are definitely fun little mini-dungeons, there's not really that much to comment on here beyond what I've already said. I just want to take a second to reiterate just how much of a shame it is that Fuga isn't talked about more. Like, is it the best strategy RPG I've ever played? No, but it's a great one with a lot of love put into it. The story and characters for the first game are a bit on the simpler side of things, but that's hardly a bad thing at all when they're this charming and endearing. And for what it's worth, the lore really does paint the world in a very interesting light. Its gameplay, aside from being just fun and satisfying, is pretty different as far as strategy RPGs go, with its higher emphasis on managing your resources as well as the party instead of the usual grid-based gameplay you'd expect. And honestly, while I do love that style, I really like that Fuga tried something a bit more unique. Well, the game's definitely on the pricier side of things as far as indie titles go, with it being 40 American dollars. I do really recommend checking Fuga out, especially since it really deserves to have sold more than 150,000 copies. As far as the next video goes, though, as you can imagine, I plan on checking out the game's sequel that was released just last year, which I've also heard is apparently even better, which has me very excited. Until then, though, thank you all for watching, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I hope you all have a nice day.
I couldn't